Hi, everyone. So, here we are, episode 3 of Taking Stock with Geoff and Mikey, and it's been a heck of a week. Um, you might have noticed if you popped into the stream here, their stream is missing from the Bravest channel. We threw up, a stream that was devoid of content the other day also, so we're going to kind of address some of that. We're going to address some issues of it's even hard to frame this. We were just talking about how there are some things that we we don't want to talk about in this discussion, not because we don't have opinions on them necessarily, and not because we don't feel it's important, but we don't really feel like it's our place to discuss them.
Two white guys teach you about racism.
Right, exactly. That's the that's what we're trying to avoid here. And I think in doing that, it's important. And I was just talking with Geoff. I think this is like as political as a statement as I want to make here, and I don't even think it should be political. But in some ways it is. I think this problem is one that primarily takes two forms. One form is an institutional problem, a problem with laws on books, a problem that can be solved through activism, through using your voice and your platform, and a problem that can be solved through political action. And the other side of this problem is one that exists on a societal level. It exists in the biases that people hold, and in the way that you acknowledge or fail to acknowledge your position in that world. And as people who are organizers within a community that has its roots as a very diverse place for people to come together as a community, we feel like we do have something to say about that second point that makes sense in this context.
I think that people's hobbies, which for the vast majority of people, esports is that a hobby, more so than a profession. Um, it's one of those places where people are very authentically themselves.
Yeah.
It's a place where the culture that you experience is very likely what you're going to repeat. I know that a lot of phrases, a lot of jargon, slang from my time in the Melee community is still there in my everyday language. I still say "we live in" whenever something bad happens, and I'm able to recover from it. Um, so I think that the piece that we really stand to be able to impact a lot as a gaming community is the piece that impacts that culture. It's what is it that you are taking away from this just in your casual playtime as an individual that is shaping the way that you see these issues and the way that you're going to respond to them.
Right. And it's interesting. I think Scar was talking about this. It might have been even on a podcast that I was on, about how one thing that Melee did for him and for the people around him was enforce a set of norms aside from what like the law will tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Enforce a set of norms that if somebody is acting outside of them, you as a collective have some form of control over that. You can change that behavior, or at the very least, you can do something to protect people who are vulnerable from having to experience behavior like that targets them.
I definitely think that being in a community like this, it forces people who are in it to realize that there really is more of a moral imperative than just the law will provide.
Right.
That there is a higher standard we can set than what the law currently is, and that enforcing that standard is what's actually pragmatically best for everybody involved.
Right. And to that end, I did mention, the fact that what I was alluding to when I said that this community started off as a diverse community of people who are coming together to play games. I'm talking specifically about the fighting game community, which came about because people couldn't afford to own consoles to play games on. So to play with one another, they would go to arcades, and it was an arcade-based community. And that spirit, Gesundheit, that experience still exists to some extent within the fighting game community. That's kind of how the gaming zone is set up. They have physical arcade machines, and if you don't have physical arcade machines in your venue, then your venue kind of serves as that place for anyone to go, really, and be able to access access the community, access having people to play with. And so when you have a community like that, you need to be very careful that you're not alienating the people who built it and the people who make it what it is. And especially not because of a condition of their birth, whatever, anything except for the actions that they take within that community, right? That's the key. So as an organizer, you are in a position where you can address those situations, and there have been organizers who have addressed those situations poorly in the past, who have addressed situations of racism, of homophobia, of misogyny, of transphobia in ways that alienate people. And the result is the same every time that happens. They drive people away. And it should drive people away when you do that. That's also an imperative on the part of the people who are playing in that community. If you are upholding... sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to add that it has a compounding effect as well, that not only are you going to drive people away, but the people you're driving away are the people who will not do those, say those nasty things or do those actions that are unacceptable. The more that you condone that, the more of it and only it you will see. And the community will get smaller, but as it gets smaller, the only people who are staying are the ones who tolerate the intolerable.
Right. And so, yeah, as an organizer and as a player, you kind of... Well, as a player, you kind of get to vote with your wallet, essentially. You don't have to be involved in a community that doesn't have principles that align with your own. And this can manifest itself not just in very overt ways, where somebody does something malicious, but I would say more often it actually manifests itself in pretty implicit ways, pretty subtextual ways. And a lot of this has to do with people who haven't gone through the introspection necessary to realize why their actions, despite the fact that they are in a community that will condone them, if that is the case, might have that detrimental effect to that community. Never mind that it's like bad to be doing that, because that alone should be enough, right? But if it's not enough, then you should also do it because it's pragmatically not good to do that.
And I think that a disconnection between those two, it is bad and also it is pragmatically bad. I think that a lot of people look at those two things different ways. I'm going to speak as a teacher here for a second. Up to about the age where kids hit puberty, they're functioning just on the good or bad that they are told is good or bad, in large part. There's that there are definitely exceptions. You know, I think as a parent, everybody should be teaching their kids not just that things are good or bad, but why they are good or bad,
Yeah.
because that tends to make those lessons stick a lot better. But on the whole, you know, a lot of the rules are just enforced by punishments. You did bad, therefore you get this. Um, and it is right around age 13 or so where you're starting to get more access to the adult world. And you know, you can get onto Twitch and have an account there. You can get onto all of these different places, Discord, Twitch, all these places that allow you to have a space, a social space that is outside of your parents or your teacher's control.
Right.
um, that's the first time where all of those good or bad ideas fall away, and only what is pragmatic remains. Only what you understand to be true in your understanding of the world will influence your decisions at that point. And I think that a lot of people will make that distinction between, well, people say it's bad, but I haven't really been given or seen the reason why it's bad, so I'm going to do it anyway. And then there's that people say that's bad, and there's a damn good reason they say it's bad. And I think for a lot of people, you know, a slur for whatever crazy reason falls in the, well, people say it's bad, but like there's no but
It
though, is
is.
the problem.
I think it is the explanation for people who say that words shouldn't affect other people as much as they do. Um, and the fact of the matter is that until you've lived that experience, who are you to say how that should affect someone? And in reality, outside of that theoretical world where this is all just a mishmash of mouth sounds that I'm making that have no meaning to them, the practical implication of that is that you are driving people away from you. In fact, if somebody tells you that they're uncomfortable with you saying something, in my opinion, that should be enough to stop saying it, at least when they are around. If I were to tell you, Jeffrey, that I felt uncomfortable that you were making jokes about alcoholism or something, because I had a family member or something who had, who was an alcoholic. In my opinion, that should be enough for you to stop saying things about that to me. If you don't stop saying things about that to me, that makes you an asshole, right? That's just what it is.
And again, like we can talk about the abstract, is that good or is that bad? But again, I think that a lot of these kinds of moral ethical questions you can just answer pragmatically. Like they are good, and they are good for a reason, and
Yeah.
they are bad for a reason. And just the fact that a parent or a teacher never told you exactly what that reason was does not mean you can't readily go out and find it for yourself. Um, so if I'm being an asshole to Mikey, like let's just consider what the implications of that are. That means that both of us are going to be uncomfortable if we're in the same room together. There's going to be some level of antagonism there. So that makes it a little bit less fun whenever I go to a local and I see Mikey there. That also means that maybe his friends, maybe my friends are going to get involved in this because they see it going on there. And maybe that can create a split in the community, which would make it so that fewer people are going to attend events. Maybe that will make it so that if one of us happens to lose to the other, it feels so much worse, and a win just feels like a normal win. There are a lot of concrete things you can point to right away, and that's if we both stay in the community, which is relatively unlikely.
Yeah.
We talked about it on the previous podcasts where players who are new to the community, they're just dipping their toes in. People don't commit wholesale, I think is the word, to the community right off the bat. They don't just jump in and say, I want to be a part of this and I want to put everything into it. And we forget that when we've invested that much in it. When
Right.
I've spent 2 years in the Splatoon community, it's easy for me to start talking about substrafing to everybody I know, but that's probably going to turn people off.
Mm-hmm.
Well, same sort of issue here, in that if we just hit someone who's new to the community with something that's distasteful, that tends to make people uncomfortable, even if it's never made anyone uncomfortable in this community before, you're doing detriment to the community that you may not see. But like, those people are making a snap decision. Oh, these are the kinds of people who come to these events. And again, you may get the echo chamber bias that all the people around you are condoning this behavior and this kind of language, but at the end of the day, your community is still much smaller than it could be
Right.
if you had the people who were more sensitive to that issue around.
Yeah. The Smash Bros. Code of Conduct panel, for instance, has a policy now that if someone has committed an act of sexual assault, they're given a lifetime ban. And now, to some people, that might seem extreme, given the contrast of what, let's say, a prison sentence might be for that. But the reality of situations like that is that if you don't ban the perpetrator, you ban the victim. And that holds true for any situation like this, really. That goes beyond a certain point, I would say. I don't want to say necessarily that every instance of this should be met with a lifetime ban, right? But that's
Every instance of what, just to be clear?
every instance of somebody saying something that makes someone uncomfortable, necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
because like sexual assault and that are definitely two different things. I would
right,
say.
right, absolutely. But the effect can be similar, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
The effect is an alienating one, and alienating the people who do not have any fault in those situations is asinine to me. Really, it doesn't make any sense. So none of what we have control over is a court of law, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not in a position to be taking away anyone's rights. You don't have a right to go to a venue and play a video game. This is a community that sets its norms, and a community that enforces its norms on its own. And it's important to be careful how you go about that. And yeah, it's
I think that it's important, as a person who wants to be an active part of any community, to try and establish, to try and have an empathetic imagination, to be able to imagine how something is going to impact somebody else
right,
who is not you.
right,
Because I think that there's a definite failure of empathetic imagination on the part of any organizer who thinks that after a certain amount of time, the wound will just be healed from a sexual assault, and that both the victim and the perpetrator can be in the same event at the same time. It's just not going to happen. Those two will never be comfortable. I mean, the victim especially will never be comfortable with the perpetrator again at that point. And so, if you're letting the perpetrator back, first of all, no justice has been done, really. They'll, in my experience, I've read some of the messages, some of the posts made by people in that position of having been the perpetrator, and man, I still have yet to see someone really turn around on that. And maybe there's someone who has actually turned their lives around after that point. I have yet to see it in the community, and a lot of the language that I see from them is language that they have designed to manipulate to try and get what they want, which is to get back into the community.
yeah,
rather than to actually be introspective. They try, and the trick is, you know, if you're thinking that way, if you're trying to manipulate your way back into getting what you want, then what you want to say is what everybody else wants to hear. Even if it sounds like that person has turned things around just from what they say, you can't trust that as an organizer.
Right.
The chances are pretty good that that person is being manipulative. So I the point is also made by a lot of the activists for banning those people that what you're losing is the ability to compete in a video game. Um, it's not even like you're being put in prison. Um, and there's also the argument to be made that the justice system is not great at people putting people into prison for that, even if that is as far as it should go. It's really hard to establish evidence that meets the
Burden of proof.
burden of proof. That was the term I was looking for. Thank you. So it's hard to find evidence that meets that burden of proof. And a lot of times it boils down to hearsay. And even when someone does get sentenced, there's some infamous cases of people getting really low sentences compared to crimes of other natures. Um, so a lot of people simply don't trust the justice system to handle that kind of situation at all. And they turn to other means like social media, like the communities they're a part of. And that is one space in which, our esports communities really need to step up. We need to be, in some cases, the group that is dealing with that situation the most out of anybody, even out of the people who should be dealing with it. So our responsibility as organizers in a situation like that is to realize all of those things that that person is going through, to realize that they're probably not getting help from X, Y, and Z, to realize that there are a lot of reasons they might not want to come forward because the first thought is, oh well, why didn't you go to the police? Well, we have to understand that that has a history of not working and in fact bringing negative consequences on them. uh, so as organizers, you need to be able to put yourself outside of your own shoes. You need to have empathy with people you've never met. You have to be able to imagine a situation you've never been in, put yourself in it, and think about what you would need at that time.
I think even beyond that, you have a duty to use whatever platform you have to make it known to those people that you take it seriously, that
Hmm.
you will do something if someone comes to you with an issue. You have to not just act when stuff like this happens, but I think it is incumbent upon you, if you have a platform, to use that to set the standard.
Hmm. I think both of those are really important pieces, and we've seen failures on both of those, both on saying that you will act and establishing the rules, and on actually acting on them. Um, Something that's really common among teachers, again, going back to that experience, is that um, a lot of newer teachers will set rules, but not really enforce them. They'll say that the rule is there, and they'll fully believe in that rule, and they'll be proud of that rule. They'll have tailored it exactly the way they want to. Um, but sometimes a kid will break it, and as the teacher, you're thinking, oh man, I don't want to stop everything to have to deal with this right now. And you keep going and hope that everyone ignores it. But every time that you ignore an instance of something happening, you are signaling to every single person who has ever considered maybe doing that thing that it's totally fine
Yeah.
because you didn't get that one kid in trouble for doing it. So why would you get this other kid in trouble for doing it? If you do, then that's unfair on you. And you will be called out for that by the people in the worst faith possible. So it needs to be a situation where you're establishing very clearly, here are the rules. And I go a little bit, probably a little bit overboard with this on my Discord, where I've got a full page of rules and regulations, and that's just from my experience as a teacher. I think you need to establish those expectations very clearly up front,
Mm-hmm.
so that then, as soon as any single one of them gets broken, you need to be able to point and say, "Hey, it was this bullet point right here. You said you read it. You said you understood it. This is the consequence that comes along with that."
Right.
And every single time, religiously, something happens, it needs to be the exact same response that you said you would have, and the same response you've had previously.
Right.
Under those conditions, that's where you establish the kind of order that you need to root out these bad behaviors. That's
Yeah.
not saying they won't happen. It's just
Right.
saying that when they do happen, you will deal with them in a way that still promotes the growth and the health of your community.
And I think that on a broader scale, also stuff like having the Smash Bros. Code of Conduct panel is a productive way, albeit not a perfect one. Um, there are some instances, I think, where, from the perspective of an organizer, I have felt that the conclusion that that panel comes to is not necessarily the same conclusion that I would come to. But I think the important thing about sticking yourself out there as an organizer, and identifying yourself as somebody who is buying into this system of uh, protecting victims in cases where, God forbid, somebody is assaulted, somebody is made to feel discriminated against in the community, making it known that are you are serious about things like that, and that you will take action to exclude people from your events for things like that, is something that not just puts an expectation out there for players, but also makes organizers who don't follow those guidelines stick out like a sore thumb. And that's what needs to happen. The only way to stop a community who is just decided, like, we're not going to follow this, right? We're going to we're going to let whatever happen in our community, whoever, no matter what anyone does, we're not going to ban anyone. Which is something that has happened before, essentially, like almost as extreme as you could think. There was a TO who said, "I don't care if this person is on a sex offender registry, they will attend our tournaments." And not only that, but they sponsored that player in the Smash Bros. Community. That has happened before. The only way to put pressure on a community like that is either to leave it as a player, or as a TO, to use your platform to tell people to leave it. to just make it known that this is not how we act in this community. This is not okay. This is not how a community should be run. And here's this extensive list of other organizers who agree with that. And although there are slight ways that I've found that I might disagree with the handling of certain cases in that way, you have to at least be able to use your position as a shield for people who can't otherwise do that. Use your privilege to help people in situations where they might not be able to help themselves, and when their only recourse is to just quit out entirely.
Yeah, I've seen some pretty toxic situations develop in some of those scenes, and I have to think, like, that shuts someone out of the game, basically. Because let's say, for example, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of someone who has decided they don't like the culture of their local community but still want to play the game. Their options are online, which anyone has access to, but that's not really a community experience. Or I'm thinking, you can't really hold a public tournament of your own to try and compete with the other community. because people with that other community's culture are going to come in and expect the same norms. And so your tournament is going to end up dealing with all of the same problems.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe with you as the organizer, now you can try and do something to stamp it out at that point. But my feeling is that those players will just go back to the old TO at that point. Um, so maybe if you start your own event and you're willing to put yourself under that scrutiny by the community, and you're willing to put yourself in, a position where you have to be strong in the face of some nasty stuff, that could be one way that you give back to the community. And if you feel confident in doing that, then that's a really brave and awesome thing for you to do. But most people, I think, are not going to feel safe doing that, and understandably so. And so, in that case, I feel the best you can do is maybe have, a list of people who, okay, this person's cool. That this person's not like them. And
Yeah.
this person will at least come over to my place and play Smash with me, and that'll be a decent experience for me. Um, and I feel like that is in very large part the way that, say, the Smash Sisters community kind of developed. It's a relatively small group of people, but they are people who are very connected to each other. They are definitely a community. And sometimes that means that they're a little bit less in person than they would be, just because of, being spread out a little bit more. But they spread information to each other about, oh, hey, this player did this thing to me. Even if their local community, even if, X, Y, and Z people in authority didn't deal with it, at least that's one way that they can spread the word amongst each other. And the word spreads, and the people who are in a position to be impacted by that can be let know about it in, a relatively safe, private fashion that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's one thing that those smaller communities do have going for them and have done fairly well in the past. Another thing that they can do is be a first entry point to the scene for someone who is concerned about those exact kind of issues. Smash Sisters, for those of you who aren't familiar, maybe coming from other communities, it's generally a side event at a lot of majors where they'll do crew battles, which are a teams format in Smash Bros, between only female contestants. Um, and it's a place that specifically excludes men so that it can be more inclusive towards women. It may sound counterintuitive, but basically you're removing a group of people who does not in the general sense, and may not in the individual sense, recognize the unique situation that a woman is walking into in an esports community. That it can be a very alienating experience, that there are a lot of just really terrible behaviors that they're exposed to, that a man might go through the community for 10 years and never even realize. um, Seriously, go and watch, like, follow some of these people on Twitter and look at some of the posts that they make about the experiences that they've had, because I would not have known about a lot of those things if I hadn't read it from their own words. And to those of them who are willing to speak up about the issues they're facing, that's incredibly brave, first of all, but also it's extremely educational for everybody involved. I think speaking your experience and bringing to light what's been going on, maybe behind closed doors, or maybe while they think others aren't watching, I think that can be a way that the players can combat that, if they're willing to speak up about it. But going back to it, this kind of inclusive space is designed specifically so that if, say, a woman has heard things about the local Smash community, about here's the way that this woman was treated by this person, and they don't feel comfortable with engaging in that community, having that knowledge, it still gives them an opportunity to dip their toe in the community and still experience some of the positive aspects of it, in a very controlled, isolated situation where it's just this group of people who are all very strongly encouraged to be understanding and to be positive about it.
Right. And I think that the foundation upon which this conversation can be had is that this is an issue that is not about individuals interacting with each other and some people just not doing the right thing in certain circumstances. These issues are cultural. These issues are societal. These issues are ingrained in a way that even the people, even a lot of the people who are speaking out and trying to advocate that we should be empathizing with people who go through these experiences have had to face down these implicit biases within themselves and have had to grapple with the history of why people feel this way about women or about black people or about anyone who has a different experience from what they do. And they've had to face down the um, the societal impact of that still exists today, and recognize the ways in which that history still echoes through what we see in the experiences of these people. And recognize that I will never feel that. Me, personally, I will never feel that. But the least I can do is try to be empathetic about it. You're right, Geoff. This comes down to an issue of empathy. And being able to understand that if this were happening to me, what would I want somebody to do to help me?
In a lot of cases, it's what would I need someone to do?
Yes. What would I need someone to do?
Because, yeah, we are, as community organizers, in something of a position of power. And like, it's as silly as it might sound, oh, I run my local video game tournaments. You know, there are a lot of people who put themselves into this activity.
Yeah. And what I would say on a general level is that the first thing that you can do is not look away. The first thing that you can do is try to understand. That's all I can really ask for is try to understand and try not to have the primary concern be your comfort, be your stasis in a space where you feel like you can live and ignore it. Because there are people out there who can't ignore it. It is their reality. So, if there's one thing that I can encourage you to do with certainty, it is to bear witness and to just try. Just try to be empathetic. Just try to understand it. Do it for the people who can't do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you touched on something very incisive in that in my experience as a teacher, again, we were talking about that kid who's talking in the back of the classroom, breaking one of your rules. And this is a much more minor rule, obviously, but the same principle applies here, that kid talking in the back of the classroom, everybody knows that kid's talking in the back of the classroom. You may not recognize it right away because you have your own business that you're attending to. You're trying to teach the class. As an organizer, we're trying to run the bracket. We're trying to do a whole bunch of other stuff all at once. And it's easy for us to just keep teaching the class and to say, well, everybody else needs to pay attention to me.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, you're going to fail the quiz. This student has made their choice, and a lot, you can rationalize and make that call and say that that's the way that it's going to go, that this student is going to get what they deserve and that they're going to miss questions on the test by doing this. And you can rationalize that the right action is just to do what you were still doing. But at the end of the day, the real reason you're doing that is that that's the easiest thing for you to do. You, as a teacher, want to teach. You don't want to have to constantly be telling Jimmy at the back, hey, Jimmy, you need to pay attention to this, or enforcing some consequence on Jimmy for doing that probably really is going to be effective. And as a TO, you want to see that situation and go, with thicker skin, you can probably just get through that and
Yeah.
everything's going to be fine.
Yeah.
And not want to have to deal with it. It takes effort on your part to recognize it and go over there and deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes effort, a lot of energy, to put up with what the perpetrator is going to say to you in response, what they're going to try and do to manipulate you into letting them continue with this behavior. But you have to recognize that that same negative energy, that same thing you don't want to deal with, is constantly being leveled at not just their victim, but every single person who fits that victim's description, whatever that may
Yeah.
be,
And
from now until the end of time, if you let this go.
consider, on the other hand, the energy that it takes for that person to overcome that sort of targeted behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And think about how fractional your effort in doing that is in comparison. It's
Mm-hmm.
relatively easy. It really is. But think about, you are going to lose that person unless they have just an enormous amount of strength. Unless they are
Mm-hmm.
enormously forgiving and enormously thick-skinned.
And we do have some of those amazing people in the community, and those are typically the people who speak up the loudest. A lot of the people that you will see being the biggest activists in these communities are the people who have put up with the worst.
Yeah.
And these are the people who they come to the conclusion, the best thing I can do with this is to prevent it from ever happening to someone else again. A lot of the time, that's what those kinds of people are coming to the table with their goal being. Um, and these are people who are getting, some of the most hate in the community. These, God, I could name so many names of, say, women or any kind of activists, really, who they just get the most disgusting, horrible DMs, and they'll just kind of post it in a Smash Sisters thread, laugh at it with each other, and go about their day just a little bit more stressed out about it. Um, Meanwhile, these are people who are in a position of, certainly they've established some sense of leadership in that they're willing to speak out, but in terms of any given tournament, they're not given the authority that a tournament organizer has. The tournament organizer can say you're banned from this group.
Mm-hmm.
If they say something like that, people are likely not to listen.
Right.
Um, then there's maybe some other grassroots techniques they can use, cancel culture sort of thing, where they just spread the word, hey, this person did this thing, and everyone just naturally goes, okay, yeah, I don't want to associate with them. But other than that sort of behavior, you look at an organizer and they can just say, nope, you broke the rules, you're banned, bye. It's that easy. And we established the rules, so it's, if someone says, hey, that's not cool, you gotta let me back, then you can just say, I made the rules, they're the rules. That's so much easier than what anybody else has to do about any of this. It's just, that's the way that it should be run in the first place. The rules
Right.
should just be right, and they should just be enforced. And if that does happen, and the rules are written well, and the person is there to enforce them, you can build a really healthy community that can withstand some very undesirable individuals, because it quickly finds them, ferrets them out, and gets them out of there, and lets everybody else have a good time.
Right. Yeah. It's it's easy. I could say this with certainty as somebody who's banned people before. Uh, Compared to the victims of those acts, that were bannable, my job is so easy.
Mhm. And so it's like, what a slap in the face to one of those people, one of those victims, if they're doing all of this work to try and raise awareness that there is a dangerous person in our presence. That, like, even if they're not going to come to our events anymore, they just want us all to know, hey, I don't want someone to get hurt like this again. And to have the organizer who could just say, nope, bye, be like, well, like, people make mistakes, you know,
Yeah.
and just leave it at that. Um,
Yeah.
it's kind of painful to think about the way that that must make that victim feel. Um, the thought that their pain is so insignificant. Um,
Right. Yeah, that the comfort of other people in the community, that the preservation of a friendship, I guess, like keeping someone around, sometimes it's just because they're good at the game, you
mhm.
know? And that's particularly disgusting, I think. That I I have a really hard time with that. But the thought that any one of those factors should outweigh the trauma and the difficulty is just abhorrent.
And I think the only reason people can make that equivalence is a lack of imagination.
Yeah.
They haven't experienced that kind of trauma before. They don't know what it would be like, and the enormity of what that would feel like is not something that's going through their heads when they consider it.
Yeah.
I think it's a to scale it down even in the slightest bit. I think it's the same kind of deal as, say, a kid who's just learned their swear words and they're using them without really understanding what any of them mean. Actually, I guess that is exactly the kind of case that we see a lot of the time in the
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
um, that a kid will learn a word and go, "Oh, wait, when I say this, this gets a reaction. I can use that." Um,
I was going to say that this is not like an old boys club, you know? You are not just like strong arming people into compliance here. You, as an organizer, through your actions and through your words, have the capacity to change how people think about this stuff. There is a reason why the behavior in in-person communities is different from if you hop on VoIP and Call of Duty. It is the act of organizing a collective of people who share norms and who act upon them. That is what changes the way that people think about those things. And a lot of
yeah,
times you're interacting with very young people. And in almost every case you're acting, you know, you're here with people who are like under 30, whose brains are still developing. You know, they're not a lost cause, right?
mhm.
In some of these cases.
Like, it's not an old boys club. Like, you're not
Yeah.
talking to someone who's in their 60s or 70s who's set in their ways. Like, these are kids. These are the future. And
Yes.
I one more thing that I'll bring from being a teacher. I think that as a generation, the kids are going to be better. I think the kids are going to be better than we were. I think the kids are going to be better than our parents were, and so on and so forth. I think that people are improving. I do have that optimistic viewpoint of it.
That it
Um,
I tell you what, if coronavirus wasn't here, so maybe there's a qualifier to this statement. But 2020, as difficult as it has been for a lot of people, is the best time to be alive in the history of the world. It really is. Things things go up for us. You know?
mm,
That's what happens. Um Humans are weirdly resilient, and yeah, a lot of bad stuff happens in the world. A lot of bad stuff has always been happening in the world. You have more resources today to get help, to reach out to people who are empathetic, to live, to have access to medicine, to not have your family members die at a young age. This is what we do. The kids are going to be better than us. I think you're right about that.
And the kids are going to be exposed to all of the bad stuff of the past.
Yes.
It's not like you're going to be able to expect anyone who comes into this community, basically, that they will just be innocent and pure and not know X word or not know about X kind of discrimination. It needs to be proactive, that we are shaping the young people who are impressionable, who do look up to us, maybe more than anybody else in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
It is on us to set the example and to enforce the standards that will let them grow up into someone who is more empathetic, who is more respectful of the needs of others.
Yeah.
And not to let them just take any given slur and use it for shock humor value on the internet.
Yeah.
Because that is the way that a lot of the kids are looking at it. They're looking at a word that they don't have the imagination to realize is the most disgusting word, is a word that if they knew what it meant, they would not say it times 100.
Yeah.
If they had really felt the feelings that go behind that word, that they would feel, oh God, that's not representative of me, I will not put this out there. They're using those words because it gets a shock reaction, because the primary motivation of a kid in a classroom is attention. There are too many kids in a classroom, and so they want everyone focused on them so that their needs are met. You see this even with, kids with siblings, that they want the parents to pay attention to them. And so whatever gets them that attention, they're going to do. And I mean, they're definitely going to get attention for saying one of those words. That kind of enforces it.
Yeah.
And I think that should also shape some of our reactions to that sort of behavior as an organizer, because what they want to do is create a fuss about it. They want to create a scandal. They want to create drama, because all of that drama is bringing attention to themselves. So rather than feeding that cycle, I see some organizers fall into the trap of deliberating with this person, engaging in statements with them. But it really should be open and shut. It should be dictatorial. It should be, you have done X thing, this is the consequence for that, and immediately ending the conversation there. It's so much more powerful to say one thing and then stop and have your word be law than to allow the potential for a dialogue with this person who's acting in bad faith.
Yeah. And that is the consideration to be made there, I think. Like, if somebody's acting in good faith, I will engage with them all day. But it's a line that people on the internet in particular cross all the time.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes without even knowing it. Sometimes people who are used to engaging in a few of those manipulative behaviors consciously will slip into it unconsciously.
Right. Yeah.
But, learning how to tell that someone is acting in good or bad faith is actually pretty hard, and often it's just a matter of experience. So that's something that, if you're a new organizer, that's especially one of those cases where you need to identify who in this community has an opinion that I trust, who seems to be considering things objectively, who seems to be taking everything into consideration, whose arguments are most convincing, who has the most unique perspective from my own.
Yeah.
You need to be finding these individuals who maybe really do understand what it is like to be in their position. Maybe it's a little bit different. Maybe you're listening to someone who is discriminated against for being black, talking about what they feel like it must be like to be this trans person who's getting bullied for that, but find someone at least who has a different perspective from yours to try and understand what bullying is like. If you, especially if you haven't been put in that situation yourself,
Right.
it is imperative on you to recognize when you're being manipulated, because if you let yourself be manipulated, whether you realize it or not, you're still creating that negative community standard. You're still creating norms that are going to be negatively impactful on everyone around you.
Yeah. And I think again, all of this starts um with listening and with trying to educate, putting in a good faith effort to educate yourself about
Hmm.
this. Um which again can be complex and can be uncomfortable, but it has to be done because it's never going to be as uncomfortable as actually experiencing it.
Hmm. The number one thing that I would say that, oh, sorry, one second, there's something going off in my room. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. My phone was making noises
Good.
at me.
All good.
It was being mean. Um, so I think the number one thing that has helped me in the past with understanding is literally just listening to other people in the community about what they say has happened. Looking at the screenshots that people have sent of, here is a message someone sent me. Because universally, when one of those kinds of screenshots of someone engaging in bullying, manipulative behavior, using slurs, um, there are all these sorts of um, all these kinds of bullies that you can kind of lump into a single unit in that respect. Their behavior is very similar across the board. Um, uh, when you see a message like that, there's a response always whenever it's brought public that, oh my god, I've never seen it that bad before. This must be just one bad person. This is insane. This is out of the ordinary. And it's sadly not out of the ordinary to see behavior like that. Obviously, that sort of behavior has been forced into the shadows because the majority of people who see that will have the negative response to it. And so people who want to engage in that behavior, like we said, that manipulative influence in people, people who want to engage in that behavior are going to do it in secret. They're going
Yeah.
to do it in ways that are not going to be seen
Yeah.
whenever possible. And they're going to use manipulation of their victim in ways so that it never goes public, um, because of maybe threats, because of intimidation, because of alienation. There are a lot of tactics that people will slip into, whether they know it or not, to try and protect themselves while they're still able to say what they want to say.
Yeah. And it's it's been difficult to see like there are personalities within this community who in the past week have had just absolutely heinous things said to them. And it is like you're right. It happens in secret. It happens under anonymity. And as an organizer, you are like responsible for this space where behavior like that can be brought to light.
Hmm.
You are, in a lot of cases, if you're running an in person event, you are in a space where people are less likely to do that. You have cultivated that environment. And sometimes that can be penetrated by a, a culture that excludes people, that discriminates against people, that is toxic, to use to use the emote, if you will. That's I feel like the word that is most used for it. Whoa,
Hmm.
but yeah, turning a blind eye to that sort of behavior is what builds that culture. That's the point that we keep hammering home here. That
Hmm.
is what builds toxic culture. That is what alienates people.
Yeah. And another thing that also because I think there are some communities where they feel like an issue has been dealt with when really it has not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's some issues that bubbled up in the Splatoon community, especially recently, but have been ongoing a little bit. And it's usually literally just like a 13-year-old kid using a slur. Like it's usually boiled down to that, and a lot of the same psychology and motivation that I was talking about earlier. Um, but a lot of the time, those threads maybe they don't come up for the organizers. Like the organizers are not aware that they're happening,
Mm-hmm.
um, or maybe there is some sort of I can't speak necessarily because I don't know which organizers saw it. I can't really say for sure what exactly was going through their heads, but
Yeah.
in a lot of those cases, what happened was there was a drama post. There was a post where a lot of people vocally got offended and nothing happened. Nothing really happened.
Yeah.
If you're taking actions on something, it is swift, it is decisive. There is one post, maybe two, and the issue is cleared up and a consequence is given. End of story. There's no time for people to talk. There's no time for people to get worked up and to be all dramatic about it. It's not drama. It's the community noticing bad behavior, functioning as it should, and cutting it out.
Yeah. DM me if you have a problem. You know, like
Absolutely.
I'll
Yeah.
engage there all day.
Hmm.
But yeah.
And isolating conversations to the people that they pertain to, I think, is a very useful tactic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Taking to Twitter, making it public, making it so everyone can see. You open it up as well to bad actors. You open it up
Yeah.
to people who are going to engage you in bad faith and who are going to make it something dramatic, or people who maybe are trying to act in good faith and don't really understand how to. You're opening it up to all of the untrained masses. And uh, if you're the person with that moral authority in your community, who else needs to be involved in that discussion, really? Um, uh, sure, you can maybe ask for advice from a couple of people that you trust. Um, but if it's between like a perpetrator and you, all you have to do is enforce that consequence on them and make it clear that the consequences will be enforced with everybody who ever does that.
Mm-hmm.
And their behavior will fall in line without you having to make a big show of them. Making an example of them is not a thing. Um, Unless, of course, something is so heinous they need to be removed from the community. Obviously, in
Or
that case,
yeah.
everybody's going to know about it.
Or you feel that it's representative of a larger pattern, um,
Hmm.
which is something that comes up from time to time. Like you see this behavior as like a cultural problem in the community, and then you probably want to let people know so that other people who might be engaging in this behavior or who have in the past know that this is the consequence.
That absolutely can be valuable. I agree. I think that in some cases, people get too caught up on the name of the person who did the
Yeah.
one thing.
Yeah.
Um, and it's important if you're making a statement like that to make it clear this is a behavior that applies across the community. I'm not singling this person out. I'm saying all of you are doing this thing.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and that this is the way that I will be treating that. Um, so, what was the other thing? There was another thing I was going to say. I don't remember. I'll come back to it.
All right.
Um,
Yeah. I don't know that there's much else to be said here, without going into things that we are not qualified to talk about in this
mhm.
medium.
Or talking
Um,
specific examples. Oh, one thing that I did want to mention, as an organizer, there are certain people who, the way that a lot of the tactics of the people acting in bad faith work involve scapegoating. Basically, what they'll do is they'll pick a single very high profile representative of a group of people. Um, so, for example, in the Smash community, you saw a whole lot of hatred poured out towards people like Milk Tea, um, towards people like I guess I don't know how active Milk Tea is in the Smash community these days, but there's a lot towards someone like Risu maybe.
Yeah.
There are people who are prominent women in the community who have spoken up on feminist issues in the past, and they're a person who someone who's engaged in a discussion about feminism in the community has probably run into at some point. Like high profile people like them who are willing to speak out, who have had very negative experiences, and who are doing things like sharing snapshots of what it's like to be put under that kind of negative scrutiny. You know, these people tend to be targets disproportionately to everybody else.
Right.
If you have someone who is um, a leader in that regard, somebody who is leading discussions about bad behavior towards a certain group of people, realize as an organizer, these people are way more likely to be targeted and need, to some extent, to be protected by your rulings. Because that stuff can get a lot worse than the average person I think would experience.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, thousands of messages, thousands of hate comments, just a deluge of them after a statement goes out, sort of thing. That's the sort of widespread harassment that you start to see in politics. Um, they are in some way becoming fundamentally political figures
Yeah.
when they're speaking out against it, and that's not the way it should be. Like this is kindergarten stuff. Be nice to each other, but that's the world we live in, unfortunately.
Right.
So, if you have someone who you think fits that description, who is an outspoken leader of maybe a minority community, maybe a group of maybe just a representative of a certain kind of person who tends to get flack from the majority in your community, make sure that you're keeping tabs on them. You're making sure they're okay. You're making sure that they have the resources they need to continue spreading that message in a positive way, because they are doing some of the most good out of anybody that I've seen. And it's the least that we can do is control the people who are in our community whenever something negative goes out to them,
Yeah.
because they're probably going to hear a lot of those stories as well. You know, they're going to be in on those conversations where people say, oh hey, this person did this to me. They'll have this kind of database in their heads that, you know, you can go to them and say, hey, is there someone in my community that I need to be policing harder? Is there someone in
Mm-hmm.
my community that I've missed that is acting up?
But on the other hand, I think to your point that you've mentioned it a couple times, the like silent contingent of people who you will just lose um, if they experience this behavior without any recourse. That is why being proactive, I think, also is an important tactic to use here. That's why you need to be actively demonstrating um, that you are taking action here.
Mm-hmm. Because I think taking action even preemptively, even before you've seen anything happen, um, that could be a pretty powerful tool. Like as long as you see, you know, a chat record between these two people and one of them is clearly doing something awful, even if that's, you know, happened in the past or something like that, like, you know, you can go and at least have a conversation with that person and say this is absolutely unacceptable. um like even if it wasn't under your jurisdiction, maybe that's something you want to consider for giving someone a suspension or a ban or something like
Yeah.
that. um but because there are resources is the point I'm trying to make, um to let you know who these people are in your community if you look for them. There are people who are more likely to experience discrimination or experience alienation in your community. And if you have a dialogue ongoing with them, you'll find out about this way quicker than you will on your own as, say, a white man. Um,
Right.
and being in touch with your community, that's part of being in a community. Like, if you don't know what's going on in your community, is it really a community at all?
Mm-hmm.
Go and be proactive in finding the information about what's going on, who's doing it, and have that in mind so that you're not just going in ignorant to what's happening, whether your rules are good or not.
Sure. Yeah, we're hitting our hour 10-minute mark here, so I think I think again, if I had one thing to encourage you to do, it would be to listen, to learn, um, to bear witness.
Have an imagination.
Yeah, and to be empathetic. That's the overarching principle of all of that.
Everything we need to know, we already learned in kindergarten.
Yeah, exactly.
And then forgot it when we hit 8th grade.
Yep.
But I do want to put this out there. If you are a part of a community that either of us happen to be leaders in, and something is making you uncomfortable, whatever it may be, please feel very free. I almost want to say feel impelled. Like, we are
Empowered.
asking you, sure, we are asking you, please come forward and let us know. Because even if you think you can develop the thick skin to put up with it, maybe there's someone else who isn't trying to put
Yeah.
up with it. We want to know, as organizers, Mikey and I, and hopefully your local organizer as well, that something is going on. And you know what? If they're not willing to do something about it, well, at least when you have that conversation, you're able to figure it out right away and go, okay, maybe this isn't the place for me. And maybe you can accelerate that process of that organizer learning, or being, at worst case, um, losing a lot of their authority for not dealing with the situation that way.
Yeah. And I mean, that is a core tenet of what we want to do. We want to create a place where people uh, can create connection without feeling fear of experiencing that sort of thing. That is why, in large part, we are encouraging a community to grow. That's what we want to see. So, if anything endangers that, that is vitally important to us.
Mm-hmm. More important than us having our fun playing our video games.
Absolutely, absolutely. um, yeah, I think.
Hey, thank you everybody for listening.
That's all I got.
We leave all of the other dialogue to people who are more qualified or have a more unique perspective to offer than we do.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good one.